I'm Paul Lane. You're watching KUHSdenver.com, this stream on Malady Drive. You're watching the Weekend Boost, and again, I am your host, Paul Lane. I am the author of The Caregiver's Handbook, a self-help love story. And I got to tell you guys, I've been so excited about today's show. I have a guest who's been a past guest, but well deserving of a second viewing or guest on the show. Some really exciting guests coming up. I mean, today is really, I'm telling you, I mean, this gentleman has written 22 books. This book we're going to be talking about is part of a trilogy. I've been reading it. Oh my gosh, it's a book you can't put down. I was never into fantasy till I met Todd Fonestock. We have some guests coming up that are just really exciting. Carmen Baca is a prolific writer, a poet. She's written many short stories, and this book, Bella, collector of cuentos, is the book that we're going to be talking about when Carmen comes onto the show. Coming up, we have Sharon Rose Hayward coming up, Winning at Work. This is a really exciting book. You know, a lot of people like fiction. Some people like self-help. We like to put a variety on our show, and so we definitely will be you know, just having a good year and that kind of, you know, just a good variety of guests. Also, as usual, I want to put a plug in for CALMA, the Colorado Alliance for Latino Mentors and Authors. I appreciate all that you do. Karen Gonzalez, thank you for all of the hard work that you do. And with that, Kaivan the Unthinkable. Thank you so much for coming to see us today.
Thanks.
So great to have you. So, this book is so intense. I mean, I've been reading it. I like to read it to Dee, my wife, and I like to read it out loud. And she, you know, we just sit there and we're just in awe because there's just so much emotion in this. There's so much tension. There's so much mystery, suspense. Every page, I mean, every page is, you can't wait to find out what's happening in the next page, the next chapter.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on the show. This is so much fun, and I had so much fun the last time I was here, so I'm really happy to talk about Kaivan. It's Kaivan the Unkillable, actually, although Kaivan the Unkillable,
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's
Unkillable,
fine.
oh my gosh,
He's unkillable, he's unthinkable, he's just unknowable. No, he's...
Yes, he is unthinkable. Oh my gosh, you know, you glance at a word, forgive me.
No, it's totally cool. So yeah, I'm just really excited to talk about the book, and not just the book, but the entirety of Eldros Legacy as well. Eldros Legacy is the and I've got this one as well, and I can kind of hold up. So Eldros Legacy is the little logo that's up here, and essentially what the Eldros Legacy is. Well, do you want me to give you the hook? Should I give you the hook for the series? Okay, so here's the hook for the series. 2,000 years ago, the world of Eldros was ruled by these highly intelligent, highly magical, 15-foot tall giants. All of the rest of the races, the mortal races, the humans, the dwarves, the elves, the Shadowvar, the Luminants, were all slaves to this one, like, very powerful race, okay? Then there was a revolution. They overthrew their overlords, and during the war, 50% of the giants were killed, and 50% fled and vanished. That was 2,000 years ago. Now, we humans, we're not renowned for our long memory, so we actually don't think the giants ever existed. It was 2,000 years ago, so they're like myths. They would be to them like, say, Zeus and Apollo would be to us. We're like, okay, we know their names, but do we think they really existed? I don't think so, right? However, the giants have not forgotten, and they want their world back. And in the shadows, they have been building an army that when it's ready, it will be impossible for us to stop them. Unless, of course, we have a party of heroes who can do the impossible. And Kaivan the Unkillable is the first of those heroes. And it's followed up by Laurel of the Dark and Ren the Traveler, and then that's just on my continent. So something else to know about Eldros Legacy is that it is a multi-author, shared world experience, okay? So the founding authors, the four founding authors, Quincy J. Allen, Marie Whitaker, Mark Stallings, and myself, all have a continent that we are writing in.
Wow.
Right? So this is huge. It's a mega epic. And you've read some of my story. I mean, like, it's big enough in and of itself, but imagine that connecting to Quincy's story, which is in Daimonon, which is, you know about Noxanon, that's my continent. Well, Daimonon is a continent with its own sort of theme. Mine is light and dark. His is like demons and all kinds of powerful creatures. Draconon is another continent, which is all about, of course, dragons, right? And then Pyrenon is this land, this continent filled with volcanoes and magic of fire and all kinds of things having to do with flame and fire, right? So all of these continents have their own parties that are coming together, just like Khyven the Unkillable is coming together with Laurel of the Dark, and then in February when the third one of my series comes out, Ren the Traveler. All of these are members of my party, and at a certain point, all of these stories are going to start to intermingle like the Avengers, like the Marvel's Avengers. So that's, just to give you the scope of this project, that's what we're talking about.
Well, as I read this, I could see this as a cartoon or a movie. I mean, this is definitely something that I think is here to stay. I think when this gets out there to the public, I think it's going to be very big. I really do.
I'm so excited about it. I feel like we've bottled lightning here, and it just hasn't quite reached the mainstream public, but you can see it. Like, I went to Albuquerque Comic-Con just recently, and I sold out of these just like that. I had, probably a dozen copies, and they just, boom, they just went.
Really?
I was sold out by midway through the con. So people are hungry for this kind of story. And so just so you know, my branding is edge of your seat epic fantasy.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, right? So I mean, like, my assistant jokes, she's like, it's all of the tension and all of the character building and all of the deep world building and none of the boring bits.
Yeah, there was not a boring place in this book. He goes through so many battles and so many challenges, and Khyven's a slave.
Correct.
Yeah, and he's gladiator. Well, he's actually free now because he's gotten his in this story. You have to have so many battles fought before you get your freedom.
Correct.
And then you fight so many more if you want to and become a knight.
Exactly.
And he's working toward that knighthood because he's already achieved the freedom, or he's achieved it in the book.
Right, but he wants more. He wants the entourage.
Yes.
Yeah.
He wants the women. He wants the fame.
Yep.
Yeah, and we talked earlier, Khyven's kind of a young soul, and he's not really aware of his greatness, or he's not really aware of his power yet.
Correct. Yeah, and there's something even more special about Khyven that he has no clue about. I mean, Khyven knows he's a pretty good warrior. I mean, come on. In this place, the Night Ring, which is the gladiatorial pit where he has to fight, most people don't survive one battle. And he has survived 49 before the king brings him in and says, okay, I got a special job for you. There's this ragamuffin in the woods that styles herself the Queen in Exile, and she is hard to find. I can't find her. I want you to go find her and then come back and tell me where she is so I can smash her once and for all, right? And so Khyven, instead of his final 50th bout, which will make him a knight, gets this assignment instead from the king, and so he has to go and do that. Well, he finds her, and then he likes her. Like, she's a really good ruler, right? Not necessarily in a romantic way, but like in the, oh my gosh,
he admires her.
Yeah, like she's like everything in a ruler that this other guy is not.
Yeah.
And so now he's got this problem, right? Either he can go back and betray her and, crush the rebellion, or he can fight for this cause that doesn't have a hope of winning, right? So I won't tell you what he chooses. You'd think maybe I just told you, but I didn't, and I'm not going to tell you. And it's not what you think. It's not what you think. Khyven's got a lot to work through, so.
Oh my gosh, the characters in this book, I mean, there's mystical creatures, this Kailar, I freaking love this thing. This is, I mean, the way you described it, it's like a giant as big as a horse. It's cat. It looks like a cat, but it's something beyond a cat. And it has these mystical powers. I mean, it's the Shadow Var. He meets these mystical creatures and he fights one and kills it. And I don't want to give too much away, but I mean, he's a very arrogant little guy. I'm not really. He's a very arrogant man. I mean, he goes to fight this Kailar, and he's he has his choice of all these weapons, and he chooses to take 2 practiced wooden swords. I mean, when this guy, I mean, I feel like I know him. This guy, when Khyven approaches something, he doesn't do a half-assed approach. He just goes right at it, full on.
Yep. He's all in every time.
All in.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's kept him alive. I mean, like I said, there's this moment in the story where he describes his first day in the Night Ring, and he's like in this crowd of people that they're pushing out into the arena, and like the first 2 go down. Just, spear through the chest, arrow in the leg, and he's just like in the middle of this, and it's just sheer luck that first time that he doesn't get killed. And of course he grabs a weapon and he fights his way free, and that's his first bout, and then, he's getting his feet underneath him, and at this point though, the reason the book is called Kaiven the Unkillable is because he survived 49 bouts, and every time he comes into the arena, they're chanting, unkillable, unkillable. The whole crowd is into it. So yes, I mean, he's this celebrity at this point in a very, very dangerous profession. But what's cool about the story is that he's about to dive into a much deeper, much more dangerous world. Like I gave you guys the setup of what's at stake here. The giants are returning, and most people don't even know that, right? And Kaiven has this special ability that makes him a crux point character for this meta plot that is impending, right? And even the readers don't know exactly where he's going to be, and maybe even I don't know exactly where he's going to be. I'm a bit of a pantser. Do you know the difference between a plotter and a pantser in the writing world? Okay, so there's these common phrases we use for plotters and pantsers in the writing world, and essentially it means there are kind of two classes of writers. One who lay everything out ahead of time, they got all their T's crossed, all their I's dotted, and then they start writing the story, and that's a plotter. And then a pantser would be like by the seat of your pants. That's why they call them pantsers, right? And they just start in writing, and it's like, oh, I don't know where I'm going to go. Oh, I'm going left here. Oh, I'm going right here. And so Stephen King is like a renowned pantser. Like he just starts his book and then, it goes wherever it takes him. I use a little bit of both, but I'm far more intrinsically a pantser than a plotter. So that's what I mean when I say I don't even know exactly where he's going to end up. It's gonna take me there in due time.
I thought about that as I was reading. I was thinking, how did he, what did he think when he was at this point, and how did, there was one scene where he was, it was over for him. He was going to die, and then Vex comes and turns out
Victorious.
Vex the Victorious turns out to be someone that he's not.
Yeah.
That caught me so by surprise. I tell you, when I was reading it to Dee, my wife, she said, "Oh, that was so cool." That was just a nice little surprise that. Wow,
Yep.
and I'm naming names that you don't really know, but you got to get this book. I mean, it's such a it's a nail biter. It's a cliffhanger. I mean, it's a page turner. I mean, all of the above. So this is a part of a trilogy.
Yeah, actually, it's part of what's going to be at least a 5-book series. I'm thinking it's going to be a 5-book series.
Wow.
But there is at least a trilogy at this point. Like I said, Ren the Traveler is the 3rd book in this series, and essentially the plan was to, at book 4, have all these storylines that I mentioned before from the different continents start to come together.
Okay, so that's...
Right? Yeah, and then book 5 is going to be the big war, right? So book 4, I've got about 15,000 words written on it right now, and I'm just kind of like, just adjusting things because now we're going to start interweaving a whole lot of stories. But the preliminaries in the first 3 books, the preliminaries are over, right? We have our characters, we have our party.
Established.
Yep, and we're gonna start moving into this giant war, this war with the giants.
Oh man, being a pantser, I bet it's going to be.
Like I said,
exciting to you too.
I mean, if I can surprise myself, I'm pretty sure I can surprise the reader. That's what's fun about being a pantser, is that like if I've got something that all of a sudden there's this random left turn that my subconscious has been working on for like half a year or whatever, and it just shows up in this one moment where I take a left turn, and then I know, oh my gosh, this is what's going to connect to this, this, and this, and this. And the cool thing is, with books, before you release them, you can always go back. If I'm in chapter 30 and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this could connect to this in chapter 2. Well, I just go back and I rewrite a little bit of chapter 2 and put in some foreshadowing, and then it's like, oh my gosh, that was brilliant. How could he possibly? Well, I cheated. I went back and I put in some foreshadowing in chapter 2.
Wow, it's really intense to think that this is just something that you laid out and just it appeared to you. Writer's block.
Yeah.
You last time we were here, we had you on the show. You told me that you wrote 2,000 words a day.
Yes, that is well within my capacity.
Wow. Most people, and this is an author show, so I know there's people out there who consider writing, and they have a writer's block, and they sit down every day, and there's a writer's block, and there's another writer's block, and it gets to where it's almost a crutch or an excuse for not writing.
I think that there is no end of excuses for not writing. You can find thousands of them, like literally thousands of them if you try. And I think so. I'll give an example. When I wrote the Wishing World series, which is a series for kids like 4th grade and up, right? essentially, I was working a full-time job at the American Diabetes Association. I was the director of development there for a time during my many spotted career, my many checkered career, and I had to go to work, 60 hours a week, and so all I had was 30 minutes in the morning, and I got up and I told myself, you're going to go and you're going to write one sentence. You're going to give yourself 30 minutes and you're going to write one sentence, and that's what I did. And the cool thing is, like, you hear people talk about the muse, right? And one of the best quotes I ever heard was, "The muse will find you, but she has to find you working." So essentially, rather than waiting for her to show up and then get to work, start typing. So I would start typing one sentence, and almost always that one sentence would be like, oh, and that would spark something else, and then I'd type 2 sentences, and then 30 minutes later, I'd written 100 words, 500 words, whatever it is, and then I had to go to work. I wrote an entire novel over the course of a year just doing it that way.
Your spare time.
Yeah, it was, not even spare time, but time that I had meticulously carved out in the morning between getting breakfast ready for the kids and getting myself ready for work, and all of that stuff, I carved it out. You can't wait for the right time. You have to make the time. If you're going to be a professional, you have to make the time.
It's really not about a gift or a skill, it's more about determination.
Yeah, there's people have gifts for writing, they have skills and talents for writing, but I look at it like, for a professional, if you say you have 10 units of this particular writing ability makes a professional, maybe 2 of those units is going to be talent. Even the most talented person. And the reason that I think people get so hung up on talent is that most of the time when it's recognized, you're in middle school, you're in high school, or maybe even college, right? But you haven't even begun to tap into what skills you can acquire by putting in the time. You've heard about Malcolm Gladstone's 10,000 hours kind of thing. Anyways, he made the supposition that if you put 10,000 hours into something, that's where you go from journeyman into master, right?
Black belt.
Yeah, exactly. You have to put in the 10,000 hours. And so if you've got these 2 units of talent, which makes it seem like you're just super talented when you're in high school, you think that's all you need. There's a tendency to believe, well, I've got the talent, so I can be a writer. But somebody who has 1 unit of talent as opposed to 2, and then adds 6 units of skill over time, well, who's got the more ability, right?
Absolutely.
They've got, at this point, 7 units of ability, and you still have 2 units of ability, just relying completely on your talent. And skill is built through the hours, the sitting in the chair, the typing it out. I always tell myself, sit down and write a crappy novel. That takes the analytical part right out of the equation. Sit down, write a crappy novel, because at least that gets you writing, right?
That's great.
So yeah, one of the coolest things I ever heard, I think it was Jodie Thomas, best-selling author Jodie Thomas. She got up and she said she did this experiment once where she decided to, because up until that point she had written when the muse called to her. It's like, oh, I'm inspired, I'm going to go write. And then sometimes she'd try and write and it was just crap. It was just like she was shoveling dung out of a horse stall, right? And so she's like, okay, you know what? For 2 months straight, I'm just going to write when I'm inspired, and I'm going to write when I'm not inspired. I'm just going to write straight through all the time, every day. And then I'm going to go back at the end of those 2 months, and I'm going to cut out all the crappy parts, right? So then at least I'll just keep going. So the cool part of the story is she gets to the end of those 2 months. She goes back to cut out the crappy parts. And you know what she found?
The winner.
She couldn't find them. She couldn't remember which parts were inspired and which parts were not inspired. And that really kind of gave me this notion that your skill level gets to a certain plateau, but your emotions spike and dip crazily.
Wow.
How you feel about what you do is far more the fluctuating factor than exactly what you're putting out. And the more you write, the higher your skill level is going to be. Your emotions are going to be all over the place because we're authors. Come on. There is not an author I know, famous or otherwise, successful or not successful, that doesn't have imposter syndrome. Every single one of them at some point is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm putting this out there. Or do I really deserve the success that I've got? Or so you were talking about writer's block. Do you mind if I tell you a quick story about writer's block that I had? So in 2021, I had just gotten done writing Kaivan the Unkillable, and I had just gotten news that my Tower of the Four series, the Champions Academy, which is an omnibus of the first 3 episodes, won the Colorado Authors League Award for Writing Excellence in Fantasy, and was a finalist for the Colorado Book Award statewide. One of 3. It didn't win, but it was one of 3 that was in that category. I was high on life. I was like, yeah, that was finally some recognition. I'm loving this, right? And interestingly, whenever in the past somebody had been like, oh, I didn't really like it, or I don't know if that's that good, or I tell myself that, it made me write harder. It's like, okay, well, I got to get better. I'm going to get better. Mm-hmm. The moment I had these accolades, it threw me. It threw me like a bucking horse. Mm-hmm. Like, I figured I'd go back to the keyboard and be like, well, now I've got the validation I need. Now I'm the real deal. Now I can start writing. You know what happened? I was scared to death that I wouldn't be able to replicate.
To raise to that,
right.
that level.
So then I couldn't write. I froze up. I was like, well, I don't want it to be worse than what I just did. Thank goodness I had already written Khyven at that point. Otherwise, I would have been stuck on Khyven. And as it was, I was stuck on this third book of my Whisper Prince trilogy called The Slate Wizards. And I wrote 50,000 words on it, and I stopped, right? I just couldn't do it. And so I baked cookies for pretty much November and December. I didn't write. I just baked cookies that year. Every single friend of mine got like 2 dozen cookies. They're like, what is happening? I'm like, I don't know. I can't write. So I'm baking cookies. Right, exactly.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so it was just a sliver of success. And all of a sudden, that was my excuse to not write, you know? And what resolved it was, I got through the holidays, and on January 1, I'm like, I'm writing a crappy novel. I don't care how bad it is, I'm writing a crappy novel. And so I started in, and I just started writing, and it was the Jodie Thomas effect. I got to the end, and I was like, this is good. And that was this book right here. That's the second book in the Khyven the Unkillable storyline. And to this day, I don't know whether people like that one better or like Khyven better. Some people say Khyven is better, some people say Lorelle is better. And frankly, if they want to argue about which one of those books is better from now until the end of time, I'm okay with that. That's fine with me.
You can't help but love Khyven. I mean, he's fearless. I mean, he takes chances. He really goes out on a limb. He just doesn't have any fear at all. I mean, like I said, when he faced the Kylars, animals, all these creatures, where did you come up with all this, man?
So I mean, like, well, this was intended, this series was intended to be a D&D-esque, so D&D Dungeons & Dragons-esque story, right? We wanted to have a party, right? A warrior, a rogue, a ranger, a magician. I mean, like, all of these things we wanted to have kind of come together. And the other thing that D&D has in spades is a whole lot of creatures. So essentially, in the back of my mind, I created this little checklist, right? It's like, okay, gotta have, this is the warrior character. We're gonna show all kinds of warrior stuff. He's gonna be kicking butt in every other scene, right? And then we're gonna show this party being built, and we're gonna go on a dungeon crawl, right? Now, I don't go into a dungeon, but as you know, the Noctums in this world are these areas of complete darkness where people don't go. Like, you go in there, you're going to get eaten.
The tentacles grab you.
Exactly. The tentacles grab you from this Noctum and will pull you inside. Well, inside the Noctum, there are any number of creatures. And so my other checklist box, my checkbox on the checklist is lots and lots of monsters, right?
Yeah, yes,
and so I was just like coming up with whatever, you know, as original as I can imagine. I mean, some of them are close to things you know, and some of them are definitely things you know, like dragons. We've got like a whole continent full of dragons, right? Because people love dragons, and especially fantasy readers love dragons. But I'm very big into trying to put something new, something as original as I can make it. I mean, there is no story under the sun that has not yet been written, but there are lots of stories that you specifically as an author have not written yet. Even if it's the same sort of story, it's your flavor, right? And so that's what I try and really lean into. It's like, you know, we've got a pretty, you know, fantasy stories are, you've got somebody with a little bit of power that ends up being put into a position where they have to fight somebody with a whole lot of power, and usually there's a journey along the way. I mean, there's a trope for it, right? But you can feather in things that are uniquely you, right?
So
and that's
cool.
what I tried to do with the monsters. You
Yes.
know? Like, what would scare me, or what would be really weird, or what random thing just entered my, like the sleeths, you know?
Oh, yeah.
The flying otters with their big spiky teeth, and they're just slithering through the air.
Yes.
I mean, like, I don't even remember where I came up with that. It just
The
sort of
shadow
popped in my
bar.
head. Yeah, and the shadow bar with their skin that will, like, they step into shadows, they vanish. But of course, they have these milk white horns that don't vanish. So pretty much they're these horns bobbing through the darkness. So you can always see them by their horns unless they cover them up with a cap or something like that. So I don't know. Those are just random things that pop into my head sometimes. Like, you know, somebody's going to vanish completely in the shadows. Well, let's give them some kind of a handicap as well. So their horns are going to stick out. I don't know.
That was cool. I love that. I love that. That was a nice touch. I also love the blue wisp of air that's around Khyven. I thought that was so mystical. I thought it just fits so well when he's fighting in this aid actually comes from the spiritual world and just tells him where the next strike is going to be.
Exactly.
And so it just makes him so much more mystical, so much more magical. You know, his character just took on so much more depth, I should say. You know.
Awesome. Well, this is, okay, so let me describe a little bit of the magic system in this world. Now, I described the 5 different continents. There are 5 different paths of magic.
Mm-hmm.
There's line magic, there is love magic, there is land magic, there is life magic, and there is lore magic. 5 magics, all starting with L, of course, right? So lore magic is like what Gandalf the Grey has, or Gandalf the White has, right? In Tolkien, it's like, he doesn't often do, like, you know, fireballs from his hands, or I mean, there are moments where you see that stuff, but usually Gandalf just happens to be in the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
This is lore magic. It is like seeing the future and seeing how different events move together so that you can be this pivotal thing at a pivotal moment. And so Khyven has a variant of this lore magic, right? Where it is very in the moment. So lore magic is all about predictive, right? It's all about predicting what's going to happen, and usually it's used in terms of 10 years out, 30 years out, 100 years out for these lore magicians, right? But for Khyven, it is instantaneous.
Yes.
It is like, it is microscopic, you know, microseconds ahead of time, and that's what the blue wind represents. It is this lore magic coming to life and essentially saying there is a hit or 3 potential hits coming your way.
Yeah, it's only 3 puffs of smoke.
Exactly, with 3 puffs of this blue wind, right?
No one can see it.
And no one can see it but him. And so if he moves out of the way of those, then those strikes miss, which gives him the opportunity, of course. And then, of course, it also opens up these blue funnels on his opponent. And as soon as they're vulnerable, there's this blue funnel that opens up. If they're extremely vulnerable, there'll be like 7 different choices of where he can stab his sword, right?
Yeah.
And that's how he seems to be as awesome as he is in the ring. But that lore magic was put into him.
Oh,
and we're going to find out a little bit more about that later on. Like, this guy he is a destined character. There were very powerful creatures that put energy into making him what he is. And some things kind of fell by the wayside here and there, which is how he ended up in the gladiatorial rings. But they're coming back for him. He's not, you know, he's not out of this plan that was made by these more powerful creatures and characters, which I'm being very vague on purpose. I don't want to ruin anything for the listening audience. So
I know, I'm trying to be careful about, you know, I mean, like his brother, Nevaz,
yes.
Yes, Nevaz is dead.
Right.
And yet his brother has a presence in the story, and the way you used that, or the way you implemented that, made it so, I don't know, it was touching. It was emotional. It was very relatable.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Very
I like that. I really like that, and just the way that he memorialized his brother through the he sees the pendant on the shadow bar, and
He's like, where did you get that?
Yes.
Yeah, because his brother wore a pendant just like it, and he thought it was unique. And so he sees this amulet of Noxanon on this stranger.
in a cage.
And he's like, where the heck did you get that? Yeah. And Nevaz is a very fun character. And Khyven, of course, I mean, he doesn't remember, part of his story is that he doesn't remember anything that happened to him before age 10. There was this traumatic event, he was saved by a fire, and he doesn't remember his family before then. And of course, after that, he has no family, and so he builds this second family. So Nevaz is his adopted brother. He builds this second family with this old man who is teaching him how to fight, as well as Nevaz, as well as 2 others, right? I don't want to tell you what happens in that, but as you mentioned, Nevaz is now dead. So obviously it wasn't, you know, Khyven lost his second family. So he's pretty tender when it comes to, like, trusting people, and I mean, he's very much, I got to protect myself. I got to do what I need to do in order to make sure that never happens again. He's very much, Khyven in the beginning of the book is very much about power. If he can get enough power, then he can protect himself from ever being vulnerable to people who have power ever again. That's his whole thing. And having family is anathema. It's like, you know, you get a family, they get killed, you know, that's just, it's better not to have that. So of course his transformation arc is, you know, he's selfish and self-serving in the beginning, and he meets a possible new found family, and he's very reluctant to get involved with them, and that's where I'll leave it. I won't tell you what happens, but
Definitely. Hey guys, if you're just joining us, you're watching KUHS The Stream on Melody Drive. This is the Weekend Boost. I'm your host, Paul Lane, and we are talking to author Todd Fonestock about his book, Khyven the Unkillable. It's so weird. You see a word and you don't fully read it. I'm so embarrassed.
Are you still on the unthinkable thing?
Yes, I'm so embarrassed. I don't know how I saw but the unkillable. And he earns his name over and over and over again in this book, and he's just such a bold guy. It's just like, I want to be like him. And I mean, not so much in violent areas, but in, in facing life's challenges. I really could relate to that in my life about, things that I face and things that are challenges to me, and how, there's always options. There's always a solution, I do life coaching, and it's there's times when I talk to people who feel like they're desperate, that there are no options, and it's like, you got to read this book. It really opened up so much of a creative flow for me. I really have to say.
Well, thank you for saying that, and that makes me so happy to hear you say that. I try and put this undercurrent of themes. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, I'm all about the action. As I mentioned, my brand is epic, edge of your seat epic fantasy. So I'm all about the fast moving pace, the action, the sword fights, the action, the fight scenes, all that stuff, very high in my mind. But I also, it's important to me to have something, an undercurrent that I hope that anybody can identify with. Not
Absolutely.
Just people who love fantasy and fight scenes, but that anybody in the world can identify with, to make it accessible. So really, I mean, like that is a huge compliment to me, that you see sort of this thing that can be applied to real life.
Absolutely. And I as I told you before, I had never been a fantasy reader, and this reading for enjoyment is just something, and I mean, I've learned this since I've been doing the show, but this was to a different level. I mean, it was just really so intense and so gripping, and like I said, it's a page turner, man.
Thanks.
The way you described it, you could hear the swords clank. You can hear him drag his sword on the ground. You could feel the perspiration on the forehead. I mean, there was so many points in the book that as I was reading it, it was like, oh man, I could close my eyes and I could see them in the, in the cavern with all of the animals way back, all the creatures in the back, and they're coming to the gate, and there's a second gate. And again, I don't want to say too much, but it caught me by total surprise to hear, that part of the book.
Yes, I know which one you're talking about, and we don't want to give away a specific twist that happens there, but yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and he, how he goes and he meets the queen and all that, and it was just like, that was such a cool twist. Never saw it coming. So yeah, it's obvious that you're putting maybe you're not putting a lot of thought. Maybe you're just letting that come to you from the universe. But I mean, it seems so well thought out, and it was like, it's almost like you had this all written before you put one page, before you typed a page.
Oh, that would have been nice.
But I mean, it just presents itself so.
Well, okay, so I mentioned before that I'm a dyed-in-the-wool pantser, right? I like to write and have things be a surprise for myself. However, that being said, there are a lot of great tools for authors out there, and one of my favorites is Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody. Now, this is sort of a takeoff from the original Save the Cat screenplay writing how-to by Blake Snyder, which revolutionized the screenwriting business. And anybody who's a screenwriter out there, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. This book is famous, and for a reason. I mean, like, you can take the Save the Cat beat sheet, is what he calls it. He's got 15 beats that he says, movies need in order to be successful. And you can go to all of the best movies you've ever watched, and I would say 9 out of 10 of them, or even 95 out of 100 of them, you're going to be able to see and put in place where these beats are, right? So there are books on structure out there, not formula. There's a difference. I'd like to make a distinction between a writing formula and a writing structure. A structure is like a loose framework where you can make sure that the emotional nodes are addressed. And by emotional node, I mean like you're building to a crescendo and the crescendo pops, right? That's an emotional node. And these beats from the Save the Cat Writes a Novel are specifically designed to make sure that you hit these emotional nodes and make sure that the story flows both with the A story, which is like, Khyven having to do the thing for the king, and the B story, like you said, Khyven having to learn to face his problems, to go after his, his demons and wrangle them to the ground, right? So those are the two stories that are running in tandem, the theme and then the action, right? And so I do use these books of structure, right? And that one is my favorite currently. And essentially it's broken down into 3 acts. You've got Act 1 where we kind of introduce the characters, we bring them up to the moment where they have to decide whether to be a hero or not, which of course, being that it's a story, they're going to decide to be a hero one way or another, whether they're pushed into it or whether they leap into it, they're going to do that. For Khyven, it's the moment he goes into the Noctum with the Shadowvar, right?
Yes.
And then we've got the middle of the book, which is all the fun and games. This is why you signed up to read this book. You got the monsters, you got the castles, you got the dragons, you got the giant raven, you've got all these things, and Khyven's got to do all his things, right? And then we get to the third act where Khyven has to apply what he's learned and transform, as well as, you know, face the big bads. All the big bad guys, you got to go after them at the end. You know, you got to make the thugs lose, you got to make the big bads pay, you got to resolve, right? And so I do put structure to that. And in fact, with Khyven, I meticulously laid out all the beats. And the first act of that, I kept 90% of them. The second act of that, I kept about 50% of them. And the third act of that, I kept about 10%. I mean, so as I start to deviate, it just starts to go wild, right?
Yeah.
But I do try to at least check in with myself and say, okay, am I accomplishing the things that I intended to accomplish when I set out to write this book? I mean, it can turn out to be anything it wants, but I do want to check in and make sure that I'm still, you know, writing the book that I set out to write. And in fact, on that note, so we've got Khyven the Unkillable, which is the first one, and all 5 books were supposed to be from his perspective. And I started this second book from his perspective, and Laurel hijacked the whole book, like the thief she is. She's the thief character in this, and so she just stole the whole book, and it became her book. And I struggled with that in the beginning. In the beginning, I was like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be Khyven's book, and I kept trying to veer it back to him.
Who's writing this book?
Exactly. She kept yanking the reins back and saying, no, sweetie, it's my book.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so cool. A character really takes on a life of its own as you're writing, and it's just, you just flow with it, it seems. It's
Absolutely. 100%. If they're talking, I do not shut them up. I mean, like, it's amazing how quick, I talked about the muse earlier, right?
Yes.
That she will show up, but she has to find you working. So it's interesting how the muse will speak. You know, it's like, you should do this. I'm like, no, it's Khyven's book. You should do this. Oh, no, it's Khyven's book. And then I'm sitting there, I got no inspiration for Khyven, and I can just sense the muse in the background tapping her foot like, well, what do you want from me? I told you which way you're supposed to go, and you're like, you know, you just want to go this way. Go ahead, you know, do your thing. And I've got absolutely no inspiration, so then I veered over and wrote the book about Laurel. But that's the way it goes for me. Like, I mean, I'll get these nudges, these passionate directions. If I don't follow them, then sometimes the whole thing will just dry up. You know, your subconscious will speak to you, your creative well will speak to you. But the trick is, you got to listen.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
It doesn't like having reins put on it most of the time, I've discovered. At least not for me. I don't want to speak for all writers because everybody's got their different process. But for me, that's the way that it is.
You know, I got to share with you, I write blogs. I'm not, you know, I haven't written a second book or anything, but I recently started writing blogs on a daily basis for, about a month ago. And I mean, even on my scale, I get up and I say, oh, what am I going to write about today, and I just start writing. And all of a sudden, a thought comes to me, and you know what? It's about childhood, or it's about parenthood, or it's about relationships, and it's like, I can really understand how that energy or that synthesized thought just really presents itself to you and brings itself and lays itself at your feet.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
Yeah, I think, for me, a lot of writing is plumbing the subconscious. Like you're just sort of you're discovering the depths. You're digging down and trying to find stuff that may make no sense. It may not fit into the story, but like if it's there, it has gravitas. It's got power, right? And oftentimes we're not interested in seeing some of the places that we've got in our subconscious, right? But it's my experience that that's the stuff that people most like to read about.
Yes.
You know? Like as authors, I think sometimes we're so afraid of revealing certain things about ourselves because we don't like them and we think other people won't like them, or we failed in this instance and we don't want people to see what a freaking failure we are. Like, 'cause we want people to respect us and we want people to like us. Well, as authors, like that's where we have to get brave. Like that's where the good authors get brave, is where they take that stuff and they put it in a story. I'll give you an example. Ordinary Magic, which we talked about last time, right? Which is my only memoir book about me and my son hiking the Colorado Trail.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, and at a certain point, at many points in that story, I made mistakes. Like I miscalculated how much food we were going to need, and we got 2 days into the first 5-day stint of hiking, and I realized we didn't have enough food to make it to the end. And I'm looking at my skinny, 14-year-old son and thinking he needs every calorie he can get. And all of a sudden, I'm like reapportioning the food, and of course, being the kid that he is like, no, Dad, you need to eat too. And I'm like, look, I got some extra stuff.
Reserve.
But you got nothing, right? And I couldn't, I was like, it was such a horrible father move, and I didn't want people to know that about me. But you know what? That's the story. That's the story.
And it's real.
And that's one of the things that makes it, that makes it real. And I think people, like, if you were to tell that to somebody face to face, they might judge you about that, right? But it's interesting, when readers, oftentimes when they read it in a story, it's like, it's all alone in their head, they don't have to talk to anybody about it, and that's when they get to say, yeah, I did that too. I had a moment where I made a really bad choice too, and it sucks them into the story. It makes it real for them.
They become really almost a part of the story.
Exactly.
Wow.
You can do things that people identify with, especially mistakes. That makes the character more endearing. Here, I'll give you an example. I just rewatched Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Quest for the Holy Grail, the Last Crusade, right? And one of the things, like, I was trying to analyze the story, I was analyzing Indiana Jones, and what makes him so adorable, right, as a character, what makes him so likable as a character. Well, I mean, I think for most of us, it's like, oh, he kicks butt, and he does this, and he does that. But if you go and you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, out of the, let's say there are 10 major things that happens. He fails at least 7 of them, maybe 8 of them. Like, go watch it. Like, he goes to get the staff head, the head of the staff thing. He goes to meet Marion for the first time. The whole bar burns down, and they walk away with the staff. But like, the whole bar is burned down, right? And he almost didn't get the piece, right?
Wow.
And then, like, he goes to the desert and he finds out where the thing is. But then, of course, the guy gets captured, and the girl gets captured, and then they find the ark, and then they get thrown down into the well, and then the ark goes with the people, and then he goes to get the ark back, and he's going to blow up the ark with his big rocket launcher, but that fails, and then he gets tied up, and you know what I mean, like, even at the very end, like, he doesn't even, the museum doesn't even get the ark. It goes into a box, into the warehouse at the very end, and I'm just, like, I was like astonished that I'd never counted how many times he failed in that movie. Because we see him as the hero that succeeds, right? But no, most of the time he's failing. And I think that's a fantastic template for life that we can all identify with. Is it probably, more often than not, all of us fail more than we succeed, right?
Wow.
And those that succeed the most, I have heard many times said that they've failed the most too, right? Like, somebody who tries 4 things and succeeds at 3 of them is a 75% success.
Absolutely.
But somebody who tries 100 things and fails at 75% of them has succeeded 25 times, whereas the other person has only succeeded once.
Absolutely.
Right? So, like,
wow.
It's so I think characters that fail are really, that's a high watermark. Like,
they're relatable.
You want to do that. They're relatable. Exactly.
Wow.
You want to do that. And I think the mistake a lot of beginning authors make is they don't want to hurt their character.
And they make him a superhero.
Make him a superhero.
Yeah,
yep.
Flawless.
Yep.
Yeah.
The Superman kind of thing. Which, that's a different kind of story that you can actually do correctly. But my point is that it's good to be vulnerable, I think, as an author and as a character. To be vulnerable and to fail. And that's more interesting. I think most people find that more interesting.
If there was, there's some people listening right now who are considering writing, who have been considering writing, what would you, and I've asked you this before, but what would you tell them people?
Do it.
Just start.
Do it. Just start. Yep. I mean, one of the things that was said to me by Dean Wesley Smith in one of his workshops is that we know story, especially if you're a reader, especially if you watch movies, however you consume stories. We know these stories. And like I said, there's only so many stories under the sun, and they've all been done a gazillion million times. The tropes have been floating around in your mind forever. You know this stuff. So the best thing to do is get the heck out of your own way, right? Get out of your own way. Sit down and start writing a crappy novel. That is my mantra. I'm like,
I think that makes so much sense. Right? Write a crappy novel. Did you hear that, guys? Write a crappy novel.
Exactly, because then at least you'll start, right?
Yes.
If you're waiting for the all-American novel that's going to just take the world by storm, and you're not going to write anything until that comes into your head, completely formed, and then you're going to write it out, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. Like, that will just sit in your mind, and it will never come out. Whereas if you write a crappy novel, then maybe the next novel won't be as crappy. And then the next novel after that, I mean, like, I didn't start submitting stuff until I'd written 12 novels. And then I started submitting stuff and getting rejected. And so it was another, 2, 3, 4 before I got accepted by a big publisher. And then since then, I mean, like, it's one after the other after the other. Every time you have to go back to that. Because, like I said, when I started getting those accolades and those awards, I went to sit down and I was scared to death because that was the first time that had really happened for me, right? And so anything can knock you off your stride.
No
but
kidding.
you can always always write a crappy novel.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to make sure if someone wants to purchase one of your books, where do they go?
Go to toddfahnestock.com.
toddfahnestock.com.
Yeah, plug it into Amazon. You can find it all over Amazon. I mean, like, but my website is probably the best place to go. Most recently updated by my wonderful assistant. She got everything. All the links are correct now. So, so you can find anything you need at toddfahnestock.com. It's no spaces, just www.toddfahnestock, all one word. You're probably gonna have to spell my name, which is TODD, 2 Ds for Todd, and then FAHNESTOCK. So just type that in, and you'll find worlds of fantasy.
And lots of it, and good quality fantasy, guys.
Thanks.
I got to tell you, as I was reading the book, and I got to the back of it, and I put the book down, and I said, man, I wonder how he felt when he finished this book. I mean it. I was just like, I'm an admirer. I just really appreciate the effort that you put in this, and that, I just thought, man, I wonder what went through his mind as he was finishing this book. Or another one bites the dust, or, I mean, what was it?
Do you want me to tell you?
Yeah,
Because I have a story about that. Unsurprisingly, I have a story about that.
Cool.
So my wife, Laura, is so supportive and so amazing. I would not be here doing this without her. I mean, like, in 100 ways, I would not be here doing this. One of the ways is, for a long time, she was my first reader, right? She doesn't read everything that I write at this point, or she is reading it, but she has to catch up, because I'm moving pretty fast at this point. But so she's there when, remember I told you about how, like, your skill tends to go on an upward trend and your emotions, kind of spike up and down like this. So here's what happened. I got done with Kaiven the Unkillable, and I walked into the bedroom, because my office is right off of our bedroom, and oftentimes she'll work early in the morning just kind of sitting in bed and typing away on her computer. And I walked in and I said, honey, I don't think this novel is very good. And she looked up at me and she's like, honey, I don't have time to do this time. And I was like, what do you mean this time? She's like, you do this every time. Every time you finish a novel, you do this. I'm like, do what? Like, 10% before you're done, like you're down to the last 10% of the book, and you're talking about how great it is and how wonderful it is, and this is such a great book, and then you get done, and then you get depressed. She's like, and then like you hate the novel, you think it's not any good. And I'm like, I don't do that with every book. And she's like, Tower of the Four, Summer of the Fetch, Ordinary. She's just listing off all the books that I've done it with, and I had to sit there and scratch my head. I'm like, do I do that with every book I get done? And I'm like, this book sucks. So then I'm like hyper paying attention to this, and I get done with Laurel, and literally I'm like, oh, I can't say that it sucks. I can't say that it sucks. So that's what I do. I get done with the book, and I think it's horrible. I'm like, oh, this is where I've hit a low point here. So I actually did think that Kaiven the Unkillable was not very good until I started handing it out to people, editors and a few beta readers, and they're like, oh my gosh, this thing rips. It just goes right through. And I'm like, you like it? You really like it? So I mean, again, back to this imposter syndrome thing, right? We all have it. Every single writer has it. And I think that the young writers think they have it worse than the older writers who have been doing it for a while. You don't. I'm sorry to say, you don't have it worse. We all have imposter syndrome. And even if we do succeed, we have it for the next novel. It's like, oh, I don't know if this one's going to be as good as, I mean, I already went through that whole thing. So yeah, so that's what I thought. I got to the end, and I go into what I call a postpartum depression. I'm just giving birth to a novel. Exactly. And it's an ugly baby. No. So that was what happened after Kaiven the Unkillable.
Let's take a look at this. What do you have here?
Okay, so this here, as we were talking about the Noctum, this right here is the Amulet of Noxanon. So Noxanon is the continent that these characters are in, and on Noxanon there are these swaths of darkness, right, that reach 100 feet up into the sky and can go for miles or could go for 2 feet, right? And the only way to navigate them without getting killed, because there are so many monsters in the Noctum, is to have an Amulet of Noxanon. Now, essentially, you wear this, you put it over your head. Let's see here. Oh, putting it on backwards. So you wear this, and then when you go into the Noctum, you essentially have to, let's see, this would be, is this clockwise? Yeah, so clockwise, you have to like rim your finger around it twice clockwise, and then it starts to glow, and then you can see in the dark, because it's a magical darkness. You can't see in this darkness unless you have a magical talisman like this one, or you have the magical ability to generate light like luminance. Luminance are elves that's their hair glows when they're emotional, and that is magical light that they could see in the Noctum by. So this is an authentic actual amulet of Noxanon that if there were a Noctum around, I could show you how it works, but there's not a Noctum here in Colorado. So anyway, so that's what this is. This is something that, so the coin is, and I'll show you this here as well. I've got this. These are the coins for each of, maybe I should hold that up this way instead of back. These are the coins from each of the continents that I mentioned before. So this is Noxanon at the top here. You have Draconon, the continent of dragons there. Daemonon, the continent of demons and more strange goblin-y kind of creatures than you can shake a stick at. This is the continent of fire and lava, Pyronon. And then this is Lathranon, the continent of mystery. So these are the 4 continents, and this is this cool little stand that I got, which is it's just amazing. It's a 3D printed stand that's been painted, so it's one of a kind at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very an eye catcher.
Hold it up close to the cameras. I don't know exactly which camera. Okay, so there. Everybody got a good view of it? Okay, good.
Yes.
All right.
It's almost like you run out of breath just thinking about how much effort has gone into this, and yet here it is, you know, and you're off to your next works already.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you keep moving. I get up and I write every day. Now, you had mentioned 2,000 words a day. Probably when I talked to you, that was what I was doing for a certain stint. At this point, I give myself 1,000 words a day without fail. That's what I want. I want an average of 1,000 words a day when I reach the end of the year, which would be 365,000 words, which would be at least 3 novels, right? Right around at least 4 novels, right around 4 novels, right? Because I do about 90 to 100,000 words per novel. So that's the goal. And sometimes I will write 2,000 words a day. Sometimes there have been days where I've written 8,000 words in a day.
Man.
8,000 words a day. That was like one stint where I wrote Summer of the Fetch, which is a novel we should talk about at some point. It's one of my favorites.
Yes, we interviewed you on the Summer of the Fetch.
Okay, did we?
That's a great book too, by the way.
Anyways, one of my faves, and it's unlike anything I've ever written. But anyways, that one, you want to talk about the muse coming to visit you. She was not only standing behind me, but she was like pressing down on me. I mean, it got to the point, I wrote that book in 13 days, and it got painful at the end. Like, Laura was bringing me food, and she's like, "Are you going to take a break?" I'm like, yeah, just a minute. I just got another idea. And I got it right down. Like, I don't want it to escape, right? So, like, I didn't want it. So I was exhausted, and I slept for 2 days straight when I got done with that book.
And there was nothing like these books. It
nothing
was
like
completely different.
It's a 1988 coming-of-age road trip story with a twist of magic, like a modern myth kind of thing.
Great story too. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Thanks.
Right now, you're working on this collaboration with 4 other authors.
Yes.
And what do you foresee in that? Is there a timeline, or are you just really?
Yeah, so essentially it's even bigger than I mentioned. We've got the 4 founding authors, but we also have what we call cohort authors, which are visiting authors that come in and play for a novel. They just come into the world, they write a novel that may not have anything to do with the meta plot, but it's in Noxanon and it does this and it does that, or it may relate to the meta plot in sort of a tangential way, right? It'd be like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, if like we gave Marion Ravenwood her own story after the Raiders of the Lost Ark ended, and she went off and did this thing over here. Or Sala, right? We see Sala's world, and we go and do it. So those would be like the cohort authors doing different things in the world. So we've got a book a month lined up for this entire year. They're going to be coming out with more and more books. The meta plot's going to grow. These cohort authors are going to continue to write. So that's going to be something on the horizon. What was the original question? You asked something specific, and I forgot what it was.
I was just asking, actually it was really just a statement, you're collaborating with other people, and you're developing in this so it's going to be a huge collection.
Sweeping, yep.
Wow.
There's already 9 books in the series with the cohort authors.
Oh, man.
And the Metaplot series hopefully is going to be 4 or 5 books for each of the founding authors. So it'll at least be 16 books, right?
Man.
Yeah. Yeah, but you can also, the cool thing about it is you can parse it out bit by bit. You could read just Pyronon stories, or you could read just Draconon stories, or just Noxanon stories, and still the story's going to make sense. It's going to, you're going to have, it's kind of like comic books where like you can read the title of Spider-Man, and then every now and then Spider-Man gets together with the Avengers and they go on an adventure. It's like that. You're going to enjoy it no matter where you start. And you don't have to start with Khyven. Khyven is the logical place to start. It was the first book that was written, and it does introduce a lot of stuff. But you could start with Seeds of Dominion, which is the first on the Daemonon continent. Or you could start with Embers and Ash, which is the first on the Pyronon continent, or The Forgotten King, the first on the Draconon continent. So you can start with any of these.
Wow, wow. So tell me, have you had the opportunity to inspire? I'm sure you have. That's almost don't even need to ask question. You've inspired a lot of people with your writing, and like your son. Does he get inspired by your writing? Does he reject it, or does he?
So I got a great story about that. Not surprisingly. So my brother is he's a rock singer. Essentially, he does this tribute band. He plays Ozzy Osbourne in this Black Sabbath tribute band in LA, on the LA circuit. It's called Electric Funeral. And he sent me this picture once because he's like really into all the 80s, metal stuff, Megadeth and Slayer and Merciful Fate and Metallica, all those big names, right? And he sent me this picture of the lead singer of Slayer, who he reveres, right? And the lead singer of Slayer standing, he's like, with his big, and there's this teenage girl standing next to him who's like, and it said, the caption was, "You could be the freaking lead singer of Slayer, and still your teenage daughter's not going to think much of you, or is not going to think you're cool," or something like that. I can't remember what the caption was. So that's kind of, and I say this tongue in cheek because my kids have been instrumental in supporting my writing and that sort of thing. In fact, they came up with half of the ideas for the Wishing World, my kids' story thing, which, by the way, the second Wishing World is coming out soon. The first one has been republished under my imprint, F4 Publishing, and the second one's coming out, and the third one is in the hopper. But, so my kids don't really read my books. Sometimes they will. I think Dash is of all the books, my son is a climber. He just did, for those of you who boulder, he just did his first V10 recently, which is ridiculously hard. That is ridiculously hard. He's 16 and he's done his first V10.
Jeez.
Yeah. So Summer of the Fetch is all about climbing and road tripping, right? So I figured, of all the books that I've written, he would read this one, and he hasn't read it. He's gotten, a quarter of the way through it, maybe, but...
It's a quick read.
I know, right? I think it's just, when your parents, whatever it is your parents do, it's just, that's common to you, right? It is what your parents do, so...
There's so many things I want to ask you. Just holding the book, I feel connected. I feel, like I said, related. I feel like even though it's fantasy, it really does relate to a lot of your things that are happening in your life right now, and it's just such an entertaining read. And for those of you who don't read fantasy, man, good book to start with. Again, go back to Summer of Fetch. I really think that was a really good starter for fantasy. Because I think you were probably my first fantasy author that I had hosted, and I've had some really, really interesting authors since then, and it's been a real growing experience for me. So thank you.
Cool. Well, yeah. If you like road trips and you like the 1980s and you like rock climbing, Summer of the Fetch is the way to go. But I forgot to mention about Kaivan the Unkillable. Gosh, we've been almost an hour here, and it is free right now. If you look at my Facebook page, go to my Facebook page, I'll throw up a new post, but if you scroll down a little bit, there's a free link, a link to a free ebook of Kaivan the Unkillable to get you started on the series. Like I said, there's a lot of books in the series, so we're giving this one out for free until the end of January. At the end of January, it's done. It goes back to $4.99 or $5.99 or whatever we're pricing them at this point. But you can get it free right now. You can just see if it's your cup of tea.
So you got one more week, guys. One more week.
Exactly.
To
So go to my Facebook page. I think also eldroslegacy.com should have a link to it. If not, then email me directly at todd.fonestock@gmail.com. Just send me an email and we'll get you connected up.
Guys, be proactive in this. Not only am I hoping that you got inspired just hearing Todd and his enthusiasm and his experience. He has so much to share, but let this be an inspiration to you. You may not write 22 books in your lifetime, but you know what? There's a book in you.
Absolutely.
There's a book in you. I have a saying on my show, everybody's looking for a hero. And if you can't find one, be one.
Oh. I thought you were going to say write one. I disagree with you. Oh wait, he's pointing at me.
I always say about my guests, because I think you're a hero, because what you've done is something that very few of us ever, ever take the steps to do, and yet you never stop, and it's really something that, and I'm of average, at least in average intelligence, and I have a creative mind. What's stopping me, Yeah. And guys, it's there. It's for the taking, and you don't have to buy anything except your laptop. You don't have to. I mean, of course, you got to do research, because I mean, like when you read this book and you hear all of these terms, about all the different, not just the characters, but about the tools and the weapons and the headgear and the breastplates and every single thing. There's a lot of research in there, but it just seems like it all comes together, and it really creates much more than a story. It creates a real living entity that is not. It's more than fantasy for me. I enjoyed it that much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Guys, stay tuned. We have Mr. International, my friend Paul Chavez, coming up. He's going to give you some sounds this afternoon and entertain you and keep you occupied. Guys, you've been watching the Weekend Boost. This is KUHS, the stream on Melody Drive. Special shout out and thank you to Henry Archuleta. Thank you, Henry, for making all this possible. Guys, I just love having you. I love this opportunity to be in front of you every week. Guys, if you would be interested in coming on our show, if you're an author, a writer, if you've written poetry, come on, give me a call, get a hold of us. paullane.net, I'm at your service. Again, you've been watching KUHS The Stream. This has been the Weekend Boost. Thanks for your time. See you next time.